Hello, welcome to another episode of NBRI, New Business and Retail Insights from the Center for Retailing Studies, Mays Business School, Texas A&M University. I'm your host, Venki Shankar, Director of Research and Coleman Chair, Professor of Marketing. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome our guest today, Dr. Koen Pauwels, Distinguished Professor of Marketing at Northeastern University and Co-Director of its Digital Analytics Technology and Automation, also known as Data Initiative. Pauwels is the Associate Editor of Journal of Marketing and International Journal of Research and Marketing. He's also the President-elect of the Academic Council of the American Marketing Association and Vice President of Practice at the Informs Association for Marketing Science. Koen started the annual Marketing Dynamics Conference in 2004 to bring together researchers fascinated by dynamic problems in marketing, which is a very strong and vibrant conference, which is going on even today. Besides this multitude of published studies, and he's among the top 2% of published authors in marketing, Koen has also found time to consult for several companies, including Amazon, Kraft Heinz, Marks & Spencer, Microsoft, Nissan, Sony, and Unilever, to name a few, primarily in the areas of marketing mix effectiveness, marketing mix modeling, online and offline marketing metrics, social media, brand equity, business models, and I can go on. Incidentally, Koen has also a PhD in marketing from the University of California at Los Angeles. Welcome, Koen, for joining me in this conversation today. How have you been the past 9 months or so?
Thanks, Venki. It's incredible. It has already been 9 months, right? I have been good. We have been coping. I always say, we're very blessed to be healthy and wealthy. But on the work side, I always say we have double the work and half the fun these days. So I'm keeping very busy. I love to be on such sessions as the one with you and talk to colleagues. But I really miss meeting you guys in person at the fun conference or at some other occasion. So there's just something magical of getting with a few people in the same room and enjoying all the brilliant minds. Maybe with a good glass of wine or a beer at the same time. But I do really miss the contact that I used to having with everybody.
Yeah, but I'm glad to see a cheerful face despite all these lack of personal interaction. But I also noticed that you've also been very enormously productive during this time. So I guess you've used the time very wisely to really rack up on your research and your consulting, I guess, right?
Exactly. I mean, there's the saying, never get let a good crisis go to waste of opportunity. And I think one of the things that you asked me to prepare is, how would you describe yourself? And
I was going to ask you.
I'm at the extreme point of what psychologists call a promotion focus. So I see life as opportunities you either take or that you let go. And I've always been, I never realized that was a talent, but whenever I was in a really fortunate situation, I really felt grateful and I knew I was very fortunate. And because things always change, they never last, I really kind of enjoy when I'm on a good ride or I'm in a research project that I really like. And so I have had the pleasure to work with new co-authors in this pandemic situation, work on fascinating new things like, what is the long-term effect of being in lockdown and things like that. So it has been very eye-opening and very interesting for me as well.
That's a good description of your promotion focus, very positive and trying to grab opportunities, which is always fascinating. That brings me to the question of, please describe your research journey so far. I know since your PhD days at UCLA, how have you moved on and how would you track your progress and some turning points in your career?
Well, I always would describe myself as lucky. It's very important. It's more important to be lucky than smart, I sometimes say. But
no,
I have
very modest. Yeah.
I have had such fantastic mentors throughout. So actually, even before, right? So I started my PhD in my native Belgium. But then in my first year, I had the opportunity to present at the EMAC Doctoral Colloquium. So in Europe, they let the students present, and Mike Hanses was one of the professors evaluating my work at the time. And so I was like, well, this guy is so cool, and apparently you can do a PhD in marketing in the US. Who knew? And so then I switched to UCLA. And I basically came there in the midst of the first internet boom, right? So every month there was a PhD student quitting and saying, "Hey, come on, Koen, join this company with me." And I'm like, "No, I came here for a PhD." And so over time, I find that really kind of sketched my whole kind of research journey. I think one of the key things, so my thesis was on long-term marketing effectiveness. And when I graduated, I really wanted to be in a position ultimately to consult, let's call it senior managers. So I didn't want to specialize in, let's say, just market communication or just pricing or just new products. I wanted to have a good idea about if you're a senior manager or a CEO and you want to allocate your money to new product launch, getting into new distribution channels, changing your pricing, changing your market communication. I wanted to know enough and have research projects on all the classic 4 Ps of the marketing mix to really consult at that level. So a lot of my work has been seeming to some people as very eclectic because, for every paper I wrote, I had to relearn the literature, let's say in new products or in pricing, but it really kept me curious and on my toes. And so I really enjoy doing that. And of course, the last 10 years, that there hasn't been one paper in which I haven't used some form of digital marketing, some form of online, because as much as it was hyped in the end of the 90s, and I was very careful to not to go too much into that hype at the time. Of course, long term in the last 20-25 years, it has truly changed how we interact, how we are as consumers, and how we can do things as companies.
Right. That brings us to the your research areas. Like you called it eclectic, but I would say I can see some convergence in those areas. Like you're working on social media marketing, online, offline platforms. Now you have mindset metrics, you have shareholder value. I think all of these are somewhat related to each other in a big picture way. So, unpack some of your recent research if you could, and let us know what are some of the projects that you're working on and what are some of your findings in those projects?
Okay, I'd love to. So from training, I'm an engineer, like many of us in quantitative marketing. So I see life as
Nobody,
input.
don't worry. Even I'm an engineer. Nobody's
Here we go.
perfect.
So I see things as input, throughput, output. And so the input is typical marketing actions, defined very broadly as we do in academia. And then the output is typically something like sales, profits, or donations or stock price, depending on what your organization really wants. And I'm fascinated by throughput metrics. So I've always been interested in what goes in between. So what are some good metrics if you do, let's say, an ad campaign? Or you go with a new product, it may take a very long time before your hard performance gets affected. So what are some good metrics in between, and what are some criteria? And so my criteria are things like they have ultimate purchase conversion. So if you see an increase in your engagement metrics on social media, my first question is, yeah, but do they ultimately increase your sales? The second criteria is that it needs to have marketing responsiveness. If you're going to put a metric on a dashboard for somebody and you're going to reward them or punish them based on it, they should know that there's something they can do to affect it. And then, of course, there's things like long-term impact. But I think those three criteria are the most important. And so originally in my life, I started to analyze these mindset metrics that we get to surveys, right? So you get a representative sample of Americans, you ask them who they were going to vote for, or you ask them if they're aware of a brand and if they're going to consider it. And then more and more, of course, I've used these online metrics, online word of mouth, also offline word of mouth recently, by the way, things like click-throughs, owned and paid media to really get a better idea of that. So my one of my main research areas is that really. So to what extent do survey metrics, asking consumers why they do what they do and what they know, to what extent does that give you better or different information than online proxies, which is really what you do, and doesn't give that much information about why you do it.
So on that regard, I'm fascinated by your paper in Journal of Interactive Marketing, where you find that you online surveys can supplement the hard data online, and but you find a very nice contingency factor for high involvement brands versus low involvement brands. So please tell us more about that.
Yeah. So this research originally actually started in a cooperation with Google, and this is a while ago. And this was Google the Netherlands, a really cool guy, Joris Merks Benjansen, who combines Aikido with marketing very well, by the way. He has a book about it. And so he said, well, why on earth would anybody ever have a survey anymore, even online? We know everything you do. So it's a little bit like the book about everybody lies, right? Kind of this idea that what you search for kind of, is much more truthful than what you would tell me in a survey. So his perspective was like, stop, spending money on these things. Let's just do it. And he wanted to prove that. And so we went and we got the broadest data set I have ever had. So we got 36 brands, 15 very different categories. So all the way from insurance to cars to then kind of the fast moving consumer goods that you and I know very well because we have a lot of data on them. And so for all of these brands, we got weekly data on the survey metrics. And this was from JFK, by the way. And then on the paid, owned and social metrics. And we had lots of control variables too. And so when we put kind of them to the test, it turns out, number one, that there was a very low correlation between the survey metrics and the online activity metrics, which was really surprising. Because if you look at what people believe, half of the people, I would say roughly, right, say, well, of course, online activity is very predictive because it's just a manifestation of your attitudes. Because you, Venki, really like the Maze Business School, right? Because that's your attitude, of course you're going to search more for it and so forth. So let's just measure your survey and that's fine. And some very traditional brand thinking goes behind that one. On the other hand, you have people, and for instance, Byron Sharp is one of them, who's like, why on earth would you ever do a survey? People just make it up at the moment. Attitudes actually follow behavior. So you like a certain brand of soft drink just because you have used it a lot in the past. So for them, it's the activity that comes first and attitudes, what you say on services is constructed. And in either of these perspectives, there should be a high correlation between the two. And we don't find that. And that was really kind of one interesting kind of hunch that they would give complementary information. For high involvement brands, yes, especially nowadays. So if you're talking about smartphones, of course, you and I will do a lot of activity online, and we will check out the brands that we are interested in purchasing. But if you're talking about toothpaste, if you're talking about more mundane projects, that you and I would talk about offline. So I may come to you, right? Suppose that I'm moving into Texas, and I say, well, Venki, I'm here. You kind of which home insurance would you recommend to me? We would talk about that offline as normal beings. We help each other, but that's not something sexy you would tweet about. And so a lot of the stuff that is more mundane.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Although there is a lot of work on online word of mouth and people asking, crowdsourcing when they need help. Okay, I'm moving to this place. Mention give me all the right recommendations. So where do you think that fits in with respect to this offline casual word of mouth?
That's a wonderful point. So I would say on the one hand, yes, there are people who do this, right? So by the way, also when you're moving, you can tell Amazon, hey, I'm moving. And they will serve you more relevant ads for when you're moving, also when you're having a baby. But look at the percentage of people who do that. So of all the people who are looking for a more mundane project, how many people actually kind of crowdsource that's online? And so the question is of representability. So if I'm a toothpaste brand only listening to online word of mouth, is not going to give me a full picture. I will need to have something like offline word of mouth. And so what we find in this research is really interesting is that if you want to explain your sales week to week, then the online activity metrics are really good. But if you want to predict them 3 months out, it's actually the attitude metrics which are better. And so a bit cheeky, I call this being brand right versus being brand right now. So if you're checking me out online, then I score high on what we call contextual interest, right? So you're currently interested in me, probably, but that doesn't say anything about really what you're going to do in 3 months from now. Maybe some competitor of me is more hot at the time of more viral. Whereas if I have these attitude metrics and I really kind of know what you're thinking and feeling about me, I have a better shot at predicting what you're going to do 3 to 6 months out.
That makes sense. But that brings us to the skeptics of a lot of these researchers saying that all the social media inherently, as you rightly said, brand right now, is that it's all instantaneous, very short-term focus, and predicts people's behavior short-term. But in the long run, they are not that critical or useful. How do you respond to that kind of a criticism about social media's impact?
So I mean, as you know, I'm a very big social media user.
Right, right.
I am a skeptic in social media advertising. Let me just admit it.
Mhm.
And the skepticism comes from two main sources. Number one is my own experience. So
Right.
I have been paying a social media site money to promote
Okay.
my professional sites, and the result of that one was really really low. I mean, below
Okay.
even my lowest expectations. So that's my own experience, right?
Okay.
And then, of course, social media sites say that they're very effective, but I have seen very few peer-reviewed academic articles about that.
Right.
And so I'm like, okay, I can see it for certain things that are very social, like alcohol or video gaming. I can see as a brand where you can have a lot of effectiveness on social media. I'm very skeptical for other products and services. So if you think about kind of putting an ad for your product on a site where people go to primarily to connect to their friends and family, versus an
Right.
online store where people primarily come to buy products and explore new products,
Yeah.
my hypothesis is that the effectiveness is going to be very different. And also things like saturation and annoyance with ads,
Mhm.
half-life of ads, everything we know about advertising is going to be very different in an online store versus a social media site. Just
Right.
like if I interrupt you with my wonderful new toothpaste when you're physically in an offline store versus
Right.
whether you're walking on the street is going to be a very different interruption. So I have this paper a few years out which talks about content integrated versus content separated marketing. And
Right.
so this is for an online retailer, and we basically find that if you put an ad on a site where actually people are looking for something relevant, then so you get the same amount of people, whether it's content integrated or content separated, to your online retail site. Let me put it that way. So you get the same
Right.
amount of traffic, but then the
Right.
people who come from you from a content integrated ad are much more likely to go to product page views and to convert to a purchase. So
Right.
in general, I think this whole kind of distinction, whether your ad is show on a content integrated site where people, if you're a shoe retailer, let's say it's a hobby site where people talk about shoes, those kind of people and those kind of clicks are going to be much more valuable for you than if you put it somewhere else. I mean, even something as simple as retargeting has
Right.
proven to be a lot less effective than people thought. So if I look for something really cool, and then an hour later I'm checking the sports result and you retarget me, well, I'm no longer really in the mood for the product that I was searching for. Maybe I already bought it, right? Or maybe I just don't want to be interrupted. And so I feel that in general, companies really overestimate the effectiveness of what we call content separated ads in that
Right.
particular one, and they underestimate the sales effectiveness of content integrated ads.
I think that's a very useful distinction you're making that marketers should pay attention to. That brings me to this whole concept of digital advertising per se.
Yep.
We today learned that digital advertising has overtaken non-digital forms of advertising in the US with about $110 billion this year expected to hit out of a $215 billion overall advertising
Yeah.
spend. And 3 years ago, we were just one third of that. So it suggests that more and more firms are getting convinced, and they want to move not only their dollars online. The pandemic, of course,
Yep.
helped a lot, but also the issue of what I also learned was the small and medium businesses constitute a tremendous portion of this growth,
Indeed.
and and it looks like the TV advertising, which is only about $40 billion, which has become one third of almost digital. And it used to be that TV advertising was the go-to media for reach, at least if you want to reach
Yeah.
wider audience. But even that is coming under a lot of scrutiny. Now you're saying that the effectiveness of advertising may be overstated, particularly the content separated versus non-separated, and also you're making the point about retargeting effectiveness. Where do you think this is heading? You think that this is viable, good spending of advertising dollars, or are we still in the same conundrum where we don't know where half of our money goes?
Well, if this is a good or a bad idea, I would say it depends, right? That's always the good the good answer to any MBA question, as we know.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I mean, my perspective on this is the following. I do think that there's a huge place for digital advertising. I mean, more
Right.
and more consumers are online. I mean, the pandemic has accelerated that. And my personal opinion, which I'm now researching to get some evidence for, is I'm really in between the two camps of people. Some people say, 2020 has changed everything in consumer behavior forever. And then there's people who say nothing has ever changed. From the moment the lockdown is lifted, everybody goes back to exactly how they were before. And I'm somewhere in between. So I think a lot of people have done online purchases for the first time in some categories. Take online grocery. So kind of the segment of people that did online grocery was relatively small, and it has greatly expanded. And personally, I like buying my groceries online now. And over time I've gotten better at it, right? So the only problem with online grocery that I find, and you have another perspective, is that when I go into a physical store, I get reminded by cues about things that I otherwise forget to buy. And 20 years ago, when my wife and I first would buy stuff online, we were only users from like Peapod and so forth. We did forgot half of our list. But over time, we became experienced with that. And so I think that people have now gotten used to online buying stuff that they didn't buy online before. And so that part of that learning will create a habit for the future. So I definitely agree that there's a role for that. No.
Yeah, but wait a minute. People who are buying online would say that you don't need to even remember those two because online it is saved and you can repeat your orders. Whereas in an in-person shopping experience, you'll have to remember and you need all those cues. So you think
that is a great point. Yeah, so
right.
that's true. Online offers you a different set of cues, which made to you maybe much more useful than what you have. Yes, and so to a large effect, kind of the cues we got offline is because we learned them over time. We became familiar with them, and to certain kinds of shoppers, online provides much better cues. You're right; they remember exactly what you did before.
You remember you talked about your early PhD days, the turn of the century and dot-com boom. And that was the time in which I was also starting to work on these online, offline, and remember our project with Arvind. And one of the benefits of online at that time for service was that, for hotels and air, you could actually go online and check out how a hotel looks like by, virtual 3D. And you also can look at the maps and all. These kinds of facilities were not available offline. So that means online provided added benefits. Same with grocery too. At that time, you remember we had Peapod. And, when we looked at the data, people could actually sort products by nutritional value. They could sort products by calorie content. They could filter a lot of things which you cannot do in person. But do you think, but yet, in spite of that, grocery was the last bastion of online conversion, as you rightly pointed out. So where do you think, are we looking at a future where people now have understood, oh, okay, these benefits I have not realized so far. Now that I'm exposed to these benefits, I'm never going to go back to the same old shopping again. What do you think?
So and I think it's really in the middle, right? So one of the key parts of my dissertation was, what is a long-term effect and what is hysteresis and partial hysteresis? So it's a bit of a technical term for your audience, but so hysteresis comes from electricity, right? So if you put electricity in a spiral of steel and you take the electricity source away, then it's still there. So it's a name that Mike Hansen's and Marnie de Kimpe had for the holy grail of marketing. You do a one-shot marketing action, like one ad campaign, and then people get the habit and they buy you forever. It's unbelievably a high ROI. So what we typically see in reality is partial hysteresis. That means that also with the pandemic, right? So online grocery shopping goes up and then it goes back down. And so it stabilizes at, you could call it the new normal, that is higher than before, but it doesn't stay as high as during a lockdown. So I think it's going to be somewhere in between. And then, of course, the $64 million question, as they call it, is if you're betting your company on either one, to what extent is it going to go closer to the old normal or stay closer to the lockdown high?
So, since you're also researching the impact of lockdown, do you think that, with the vaccines coming in, and let's assume that the vaccines are effective and they are distributed, and let's say within 6 to 9 months, everybody has access to vaccine, and many of us actually are vaccinated, where do you see our marketing and retailing, particularly in the next at least 9 months to 12 months?
So I think a lot of the old trends will accelerate, right? The death of the
Right.
mall. The mall is such a typical kind of concept that was very strong in at least Americans' minds that
Right.
we that we both traveled into in our lives for about, I would say, 2-3 decades. And the mall kind of really dependent on a pretty rich middle class that liked to hang out at the mall and do stuff. And teenagers used to hang out at the mall. But of course, we shouldn't forget the mall destroyed the main street, right? Because before
Right.
the mall, you had these kind of beautiful streets where you would go to. And I
Right.
saw the same thing when I was in Turkey. So all of these cities in Turkey had these wonderful main street, wonderful shops. And then they built these big malls. And of course, the merchandise had to come, or the clientele had to come from somewhere. So now you see that the malls are a lot less profitable. Also, their anchor stores are going out of business. And so I think we're going to return to a situation where, yes, there's going to be a huge value for online shopping, specifically for the things you mentioned, also for the social aspect of having reviews, for instance, right? Or people like you or who bought this also bought that. This is all the kind of stuff that is very hard to replicate offline that we enjoy online. But it's going to be a much more integrated world where we kind of combine the things. I have this big kind of conflict of opinion with my sons. So I think the future is augmented reality, and they think the future is virtual reality. So my perspective on life is that we are a bit tired of living different online and offline lives, also in how we present ourselves. So we want these things to be more integrated. And for me, augmented reality is just a wonderful way. You go into a physical store and you have glasses on that tell you the reviews or something like that, or that you bought it before, so you can get all of your cues. But you also have the offline stimulation. So I think that the future will very much go toward that. Whereas kind of the mall, this idea of anchor stores, and that you come there to hang out for 2 or 3 hours because you have nothing else to do. My kids, in their free time, they play video games on a whole bunch of consoles, and they have absolutely zero desire to go to malls with their friends. They would rather
Right.
their friends to come over and play video games together.
So you agree that the days of malls being a primary magnet for social shopping is gone, but more you're looking at a hybrid situation where people would go to mall for some human interactions, but they are not the primary driving force in people's lives. Mainly
Indeed.
because you said the target audience, the millennials and the Gen Zs, your kids, and so on, they are probably not very attracted to the old way of shopping, right? Is that
Exactly.
what I
Yep.
hear from you? Right.
Yep.
I think that is a very good thought for the future. So far, we've been talking about your fascinating research and all the insights. Tell us a little bit about who is Koen Pauwels as a person, aside from doing all this great research and then doing hundreds of things all at once. Tell us something about your other side, non-research side.
So I mean, this typically comes up in a cocktail party as what you do for fun, right?
Right.
And so I have two fascinating sons with very different characters. The youngest one is extremely kind of heavy on sports and so forth. So every day I trampoline jump with him outside. No matter how cold it gets here in Boston, even in the snow, I will jump the trampoline with him.
Okay,
and then
good.
and then from the moment he was a little kid, we would go kind of jumping from rock to rock, and that's really
Yeah.
nice. Kind of with my wife and my other son, I really enjoy skiing and cycling, so I'm very excited for the skiing season to be back here.
Okay, good.
And then I don't have much time for video games, but since my kids are so much into it, I just love video games that the three of us work together towards a common goal, and so
Okay,
defeat an enemy together instead of kind of just fighting
playing
against each
against
other.
each other.
Because
That's
first
good.
of all, I lose against them, and second, it's just not the same kind of togetherness, I think.
And how old are your sons, if I may ask?
They're 11 and 15. So
11 and
yeah,
15.
the
So,
oldest one is in high school and the youngest one in
okay.
mid school. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure you're keeping them busy in this tough pandemic time. But I'm glad to know that you have a lot of physical activities outside because that helps during this pandemic time.
Yep.
Now, let's look forward 5 to 10 years from now. I know I asked you for a forecast 9 to 12 months from now. Where do you see marketing or retailing or business in general headed, and what should managers be doing or thinking differently for the next 5 to 10 years to be prepared?
Yeah. I have been fascinating with the death of cookies, right? Or the impending reduced relevance of cookies. So and in my opinion, and this is okay, partly because of my experience, I have always been skeptical about the claims of performance marketing. And so you know this, right? So in what is it, 1999 or something like that, when the first banner ad came on, they're like, forget about everything else you do, TV, radio, it's all gone, because with the banner ad, with the click through, we can tell you exactly what it's doing. And you don't have to, guess anymore. And then, of course, that was when the click-through rate was something like 2% on the banner ad, and now it's less than 0.001%. So then people that do banner ads say, oh, but wait a minute, a lot of the people who don't click through, they still see it. It's like a billboard, and you should integrate it in your marketing mix and with synergy. And you would, for instance, show that if people have been exposed to a banner ad, they're more likely to respond to your lower funnel advertising. And that's basically what I have been doing all my life, right? I have built systems of, there are all your marketing actions. This is how they work together. This is how they increase each other's effectiveness, and this is basically how you then should reallocate your resources. So I think that performance marketing, this kind of individual consumer level tracking, has been very valuable, but is always missing a big part of the influence that you can track at the individual level. And that could be TV advertising, radio, billboards, out of home. It could be offline word of mouth. So I'm really looking forward to combine that attribution modeling with marketing mix modeling, the aggregate things that I've been doing for a long time, and then to combine that with customer lifetime modeling. So I ultimately would want to go to a situation maybe in 5 years that I can say, look, Venki has been exposed to these TVs and these radio ads. And by the way, I think TV is fantastic still to build a brand, and it makes everything else more effective. And research has shown that. And so I want to say what you're exposed to that way. I want to show what you have specifically done online on my side, and on generally industry side, and maybe on my competitors. And then I also really want to know how value you're going to be when I acquire you as a customer. Are you one of these people that just going to buy me on price and then leave me, or are you one of these folks that are going to be very loyal to me for 10 years? And so combining kind of the individual level attribution modeling with marketing mix modeling, which is more top down, with customer lifetime value, I think would be a wonderful kind of point to get to.
All right, that's you described the holy grail of marketing. But what could managers, do you think we will have the data and the wherewithal to be able to do that in 5 to 10 years? Because we are getting really pressurized in terms of data availability, privacy, and so on. Do you think companies would have a 360 view of the customer at all? Because it looks like right now the access and the window is getting narrower and narrower.
Well, and this is something that I really felt, right, and I'm going to put, it's not the size of the data, my book up there. So right. Even, and this is now 8 years ago, even 8 years ago when the big data hype is coming, I'm like, well, the companies I consult, they don't even know what to do with the data they have. So how right. about we first do things like, what is your objective? What is your vision? What do you really want to achieve? Right. And then we go and look for good data to get there. And I think our proxies are getting better. Right, so we have gotten more and more precise. We can never ideally measure, perfectly what's in your head. That would be illegal and unethical. So we can never kind of build little chips in millions of consumers' head to know what they're thinking at every split second. Unfortunately, but we have gotten closer. But what I worked with companies much more, and also in this book, is to say, okay, what do you really want to achieve? How do we get data, and how do you then take actions based on the analysis? Because in most companies, you come in, right, as a consultant, they pay you lots of money, they're very happy with your model, you give a big presentation, they pay you, and then they don't do anything with what you said. And that has to do with political infighting in the company, but it also has to do with there not being a culture all the way at the top of the company to really be driven by data. And so I find, for instance, I'm still surprised. I shouldn't be, but I'm still surprised how concepts that you and I know from our academic reading and writing haven't made it really through popularity in what marketing managers practice every day. And so I think there's a huge opportunity to to kind of advocate for this, and to make things more available, like in podcasts or in easy to read articles and books like you do, to that more and more people would actually start practicing data-driven thinking and conceptualization. And then I think, so the data part is an important piece of it, but in my experience, it has never been the most important thing of helping companies improve their decision making.
Thank you for sharing that, because that is a very honest evaluation, and I can also attest to some of those from my own experience. I think, but I'm also noticing a increased alertness of companies to data-driven,
Yeah.
analytics-based decision making. But now you've come a long journey in terms of our questions and answers so far. But for the final question, we have a great viewership and listenership in here who are drawn from very different diverse audiences. We have students, former students, executives, public policy officials. We have other educators also viewing this or listening to this. What message would you have for any of these members for the future? How can they best prepare for a future that is increasingly being reshaped by data, reshaped by all the changes, accelerated by the pandemic?
I mean, I would say number one, and maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, right? But know your tools and your frameworks. It's just, I tell you, it's mind-boggling to me that people sometimes who call themselves marketing experts don't know some of the major frameworks. And what we as academics teach, right? That marketing is not just communication. that that you can promise what you can deliver. And so there's almost, so there's a lot of this kind of thinking, and it works even if you don't have the data. And maybe this is, a very nice and short anecdote. So when I came to Istanbul in 2008, this was basically a conglomerate that had 6 businesses in 6 countries, and they said, Koen, Pauwels, the crisis is coming. How should I react in a recession? All the academic articles I read says that I have to increase my marketing spending, and all my financial managers are telling me that I have to decrease my marketing spending. So I gave him the formula of optimally setting your budget, and it requires to know the elasticity. And he's like, Koen, I don't have any data to give you to analyze elasticity. I have no clue what my advertising sales elasticity is. And I said, no problem. Let's just think through the formula. And we thought through the formula, and just, the discipline of the thinking make us decide that we should increase the budget in some countries and businesses and decrease it in another one. And so just thinking through the elements is typically more than half of the benefits you get of hiring an analyst and kind of having the discipline of the thinking, and then actually getting better estimates by better models and better data. That's really the icing on the cake, I would say.
Excellent. And that's a very valuable and powerful piece of advice, because what you're saying is that please understand the basics and the framework and continuously learn through data, and that would be the best way to prepare yourself. On that note, Koen, I really wanted to thank you for today's exhilarating conversation with you. Hey, we could go on, but in the interest of time, I wanted to stop and thank you so much for sharing your insights. And I wish you all the very best in your future research. I'm sure you're going to publish a ton of new insight and studies, and I'm going to be eagerly looking forward to reading many of your research.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And if I may, so I made all my papers publicly available. So I bought the domain name marketingandmetrics.com. So if you
Okay,
go to
thank you.
marketingandmetrics.com, you will see them organized by the 4 Ps. And I hope it's useful in spreading the word of the research.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent. That'll be very helpful. Our viewers and listeners would definitely go and check it out. And thank you so much again. Thanks, Koen.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.